Hi everybody. This video is by way of, if you like, preparation for the outdoor workshop we're going to do. We're going to draw outdoors. And what I'm really hoping is that it will prepare you in a way for the way you look at what we're going to see. What I mean by that is, what I really want you to do is think hard about ways in which you can interpret what's in front of you. In other words, you're not thinking purely about, if you like, a finished picture necessarily, that you're thinking about what you're seeing, the marks, the patterns, and how you translate those with the medium that you've got. In this case, it's going to be charcoal or probably pencil and chalks, and probably black and white most of the time. So how do you interpret that world in front of you with those materials? And what I've done in the video hopefully is chop down little sections and make us think about stripping away all of the things we don't want to know and focus on those things that we want to find out. So you might go out to the landscape one day and you might be interested in color. So you've got to strip away in your head what you're looking at and focus on that element and deal with that. But if you get overwhelmed with all of the things we see, especially outside, because there's lots of movement, lots of color going on, lots of light, it is very difficult. But that is the challenge for this workshop. So hopefully what you see in this video will be useful. Again, please look at it at least once or twice before we go on the workshop. So you've got a head start, we've got a head start, and we can give even more time, if you like, to the action of drawing and mark making, and then looking and discussing what you're doing and how you can change that in some way. Okay, everybody, what I hopefully am doing here is just running through some photographs that I took in the area where we're going to be drawing on the day. And what I've also done is try to look more closely at those images. So, for example, this first photograph, very nice sunny day, nice sort of a glade and looking out towards the river. And I'm trying today to try to get you to think differently about what you see. So in other words, going beyond looking and saying, this is a tree, this is a river, this is a nice picture, if you like. I'm trying to analyze it from the point of view of the gestures and the pressure and the angles and the patterns that we're going to use with the tools we have. In other words, charcoal, pencil, and so on, and pastel. So we're trying to use completely different language, and that is what I really want to get across. So here's a picture, very nice, interesting sunny day scene or whatever, but I would like us to look at it in a different way. So what I've done is I've taken and gone a little bit closer. So if I can just look at this image, this is the same image, but I have zoomed in a little bit closer, so there's a lot more of the water and so on. And looking at it in terms of marks. Forget what it is, forget it's a tree or water or anything else, and think about the marks we're going to make. Look at the marks, for example, up in this dark tree that's hanging over here. They're dark, they're bold, they're fairly flat, and the edges of them are quite curved and gentle when you think about it. If you look here, if you watch the little mouse there going around that, it's a gentle, curved, flat area. So in terms of us as artists, if you like, we're trying to say, how can I manipulate the pencil or the charcoal to interpret that? So we talk about slow marks, fast marks, marks which are heavily pressured, marks which are very light, and so on. So think about what will happen in the case of this here. If we come down here a little bit to the water area, it's shimmering. It's blurred and blended together. The colors and the tones are all blurred. And then as it comes across here, it breaks up a little bit. So try to imagine and feel the sensation in a pencil or a piece of charcoal when you would be interpreting this here. So that is important. If we go to the next slide here, here we are again, closer and zoomed in even further to a more close detail, if you like. And I've written here, look at the marks. Are they fast marks or slow marks? Are they pointed marks or flat? In other words, could you imagine drawing with the point of your pencil or the point of a charcoal, or would it be the flat edge, the soft edge of it? Are they heavy or light? In other words, do you press heavily or do you press lightly? Would you lean heavily or lightly? And are they blocks? Are they solid blocks? Or are they merged together in some way? So if we look again at these leaves, we know, for instance, that the curve is a very gentle curve. Perhaps we would say it's a slow line. If we were drawing that, would it be slightly slower? Would we use the pointed edge or the flat edge? Well, we could use both, but you could imagine a flat edge. Sorry, I just go back here. I jumped forward too quickly there. So that might be a flat edge of a tool that we're using. Is it heavy or light? Well, we would guess it's heavy. So you would be leaning more heavily. Is it a solid block or is it merged together? Well, it's probably a solid block. The same thing applies to another section. You could take these sections here. So look at the movement in the water. Look at the shimmering little marks we have here. Completely different in some ways. So are they fast or slow? I would suspect that they're probably fast marks here. Faster movement with our hands. Are they pointed or flat? Maybe that's one for the point of a pencil or a piece of charcoal. Those little thin lines could be squiggled in there perhaps. Are they heavy or light? Well, they vary a bit, but generally they're a little bit lighter than the marks we would have over here, of course. So we might be leaning that little bit more delicately. Are they blocks, solid blocks, or are they blended? These maybe merge a bit more, so maybe we'd mix them around with the point of the pencil or the charcoal, maybe mix white and black together with the points and smear them in together and so on. So what I'm trying to say here, this is no longer a picture of leaves over a river. It's a series of marks and patterns which we have to interpret in terms of those words we have here on the left-hand side. Here's another very nice picturesque sort of scene. Trees in a nice sunny glade again, the sunlight cracking through here, this lovely silhouette of a dark tree against the sun. So it's a pretty enough picture. But today in the workshop, what we're going to be doing is not thinking necessarily about that. We're going to think about those marks again. So here we have another zoomed in, closer version of that tree. And I've got those words again. You can see, just to remind us, fast or slow, pointed or flat, heavy or light, blocks or blended. So obviously we could look at this big bold tree here. It's a smooth sort of edge, curved edge. It's not wriggly, it's not hairy, it's not broken, it's a smooth edge. So perhaps you would draw that quite slowly, perhaps with a tool. Is it pointed or flat? Well, again, you could develop it with big, bold, flat marks with the tool that you're using. Is it heavy or light? Well, it seems to be heavy, dark, so you'd be leaning fairly heavily on it. Is it a solid block or does it merge with its background? It's a pretty solid block. It's got a crisp edge there, so we call that solid. We're not smearing one edge into another. If we come over here to where the trees and the light are, look at what you've got. You've got little speckly marks, perhaps fast, dotted, squiggled lines, maybe made with a pointed tool, perhaps. Heavy, light, well, it's generally light, but it varies. So you might be moving the pressure from slightly heavier to lighter while you do squiggle those marks. So the marks compared to this might be very different, quite different. Is it blocky or is it blended? Well, this tends to blend maybe a little bit more here. From light to medium to dark tones, all these little speckles merging around, whereas this is one fairly solid, straightforward shape, perhaps. And this is not a perfect solution to drawing in itself. It's a good solution to getting used to the tools that you're becoming familiar with. All right, folks. So, in the light of the things we said earlier and those images that we looked at earlier about how we might interpret the world in terms of the marks, what I've done here is I've found a copy of one of the images that I showed you. And what I've done is I've printed it actually in black and white. So it's a bit more high contrast now, which is kind of nice. And it will also, if you like, show up some of the marks, the qualities of marks that maybe I have been talking about. So what I'm doing at the minute, I'm just actually using a soft pencil. So this I think might be a 6B, 5B pencil, fairly dark pencil. And following on from that, if I think about the marks that I see here, so for instance, at the top here, I can see lots of fairly strong dark marks. So it may be, you can see I'm using the point of the pencil, that the way I'm interpreting this, I'm making these little flat, fairly dark, I'm leaning fairly heavily, so it's heavy. They're fairly slow marks. I'm not digging in, I'm not squiggling too hard. And I'm not trying to copy the shapes of leaves. What I'm trying to do is have some suggestion of the quality of those leaves. And the quality for me is they're dark, therefore I'm leaning heavy. They're fairly crisp, therefore I'm leaving a smooth line. I'm not blending them too much together. And I'm using the point of the pencil at this moment. But what I can do, just as an example, is I could lean the pencil down on its side and just take and use the broad side there. So you can see as I move that, just move that back again. You can see as I'm making marks with the flat of the pencil, I'm just imprinting the edge, and you can see the little marks that I'm making with that. So it could be a flat pencil, leaned heavily to create those and working fairly slowly to create those. Then obviously we can see that along up here somewhere you have this big branch. Theoretically, if you want, you could say, okay, it's a dark, solid, fairly solid mass. There's not a lot of movement in it, so it's a fairly calm, slow and dark. So again, if I'm using a pencil, perhaps with the side of the pencil, I could just create that branch coming down there with that big flat side. This is especially useful if you're working outside. And when you're working outside, you sometimes have to work quite quickly because it might be the weather, it might be other conditions. So rather than sitting all day going like this, I'll fill this in, you might want to say, let's take the broad side of the pencil. We're going to look at the graphite shortly as well anyway, which will give you another dimension to things. But there are 2 marks already that I've made. And I'm thinking about them. I'm not just making them up as I go along. I'm looking at the source and I'm saying, what do I see here? What are the qualities? And you saw them in those previous part of the video, the words that I put up beside them. Ask yourself those questions and then say, okay, what things can I do with this pencil to make that happen? Will it be upright like that? Will it be on its flat? Will I be leaning heavily? Will I be leaning very lightly? Will I be moving quickly or will I be moving slowly? So for example, in amongst this area here, there are lighter areas. So you have these very dark spotty marks here, which could be represented by these. But beside these, there are very little grey marks. In fact, so much so that they're merged almost together. You can't really see the individual leaves. There are leaves there, but because we're so far away, we can't see that. So perhaps, again, with a pencil and the flat side of the pencil, I can make some grayer marks, paler marks. Now there's a little line coming through there because I think there's something underneath the page, so that's not part of my plan, if you like. But you see what I'm doing here? I'm moving my hand fairly quickly, not too fast, and I'm leaning on it, pardon me, not too heavily, to create this grey haze. And that grey haze starts to perhaps suggest the paler leaves that are denser and closer together compared to these big strong ones that are maybe more like the ones over the far side there. So that's all to do with movement. And amongst that, I might vary it a little. I might put a wee bit more pressure here and there. See that? So that we get a little bit of variety within that haze. But we're now creating different textures, different senses of the material that we were looking at there. If we come down here, you can see there's a big crumply mass of dark leaves silhouetted against the light, which is lovely. So that's a great opportunity to really maybe start moving a little bit faster because they're all close together. So I'm kind of, again, flat out the pencil here just to see how that goes. Imprint, move, imprint, move. And it's instinctive, you know, you literally try to feel the pattern of the leaves. So you can watch the movement on my hand rather than what you're seeing on the page there. Watch the way my hand's twitching because that's what it's about. I'm finding the correct twitch. That's a new word for our art studies. But you can see as it's building up, press, imprint, until this emerges as some sort of surface that reflects perhaps the leaves and the things that are going over here. Okay, so we now have 2 or 3 different types of marks, I guess, going on. In amongst here, just as a matter of interest, if we go back up to this hazy area, this area here, there are amongst that little threads of little fine branches. Now, it may be hard to see in the video, I appreciate, but just as an excuse to do this, if I then say, okay, it's a fine line I've got there, so it's going to be a point. It's not particularly dark, so it's not going to be heavy. So I'll bring up the point, a few little marks here and there, look, just suggesting the little branches that might be just hanging out there, broken up. Again, not necessarily a portraiture of it, not necessarily a realistic, when I say realistic, a photographic interpretation. Because remember, we are draftspeople, we are artists, we're not photographers in that sense, we're painters or whatever. If we come down here now, you have this lovely area of shimmering, reflective water. And you can see immediately, primarily the lines are all running horizontally because of the nature of the water. And you can see that they're little sharp, quite, sharp, fast marks. So they're little jittery marks, for want of a better word. And they're quite pointed, they're quite linear. So therefore, again, I might be looking at the point of the pencil here. So if I come down somewhere like this and start to think, okay, let's make some of these lines, some of them darker than others, but I'm working quite fast. You can see the speed of my hand, and then I'm taking the pressure off here, so they're much paler. Then there's another lovely area going on near the side here where it's quite dark, and it's almost solid, so I'll scribble that in, let the pencil do the work and see what marks the pencil can give me. There's a lovely little reflective line going down there. And again, paler, heavy, pale, heavy. You can see that, but all similar in their pattern and similar in the speed, all the way down towards the end where the ground is, the dark area here at the bottom. You can see that. And again, that area, again on camera, certainly is a very solid, almost black area, if you like. And it might be interesting to treat it like that. In other words, get in there, flat of the pencil, but flat and heavy. So we can get that in fairly quickly. I know there is another big branch coming up here, so get that down there. Drawing is a process of discovery. And if we get obsessed with a likeness or right away, then we'll stop discovering. So you can see the various marks. You can see my marks beginning to try and interpret that, interpreting this, interpreting that, the haziness there, perhaps that, these marks here. suggesting that. And you can see all of the different qualities of marks. And again here, it could be even that if I was taking and rubbing out parts of that down there, I would get some of these nice lights as well. But you can see some of the qualities going on, and it can continue on up there. We could keep on, we could speed up a little bit and start to really let ourselves go. So when you're out on the day, it would be nice to allow yourselves, you can see my hand moving at great speed. My eye is trying to catch where I see dark, light, heavy. There's a heavy bit there. There's a darker few bits there. There's a lighter bit here. There are lots of light bits in there, but there's lots of wee squiggly edges and things there. I think the pencil's just about had it actually, but you can see what I'm trying to do is quickly interpret that. When I see that in heavily, when I see that pull off the pressure. When I see this, it's busy and squiggly. When I see that, it's calm and smooth. And so I'm reacting with the muscles in my hand very quickly as I look at that. And as I draw that 2-3 times, each time I'm getting to know this image even more and more, which is what the drawing is about. So think about that, certainly in terms of pencil. I'm just pushing a little frame around that curiosity to see how that changes it. But there are some marks that might interpret this image here. Now what I want to do is look at a different medium, different material. So we're now going to look at compressed charcoal and some chalk, some white pastel, I should say. Anyone who has maybe been to previous workshops may have been working with these, so maybe has some sort of notion about the way that you want to use them. But the principle is exactly the same for today's exercise for this outdoor workshop, is that what marks can I make with these that will interpret the image that I want to interpret in front of me, the trees or the grass or whatever. You can see already the marks that I'm making with my fingers because of the black coming off that. So all sorts of marks are possible. Please be prepared to get a little bit messy. There's no real way around that. But following on from the last thing, if I look here at an image of the trees that I was talking about earlier, and I take and establish the same sort of idea. Look again, you'll see that my hand is constantly moving. And in a way, I suppose you could say, well, why not stop and think about it? And that there is an argument for that in a different exercise. But for what I'm trying to encourage you to do, by moving constantly means that you're constantly making marks. And if you're making marks all the time, you're seeing all the possibilities. If you stop and start, then you'll only be inclined to be very careful. I'll do that wee bit. Let's have a wee think about it. I'll have another wee bit of that. Whereas I'm trying to encourage you to live with your drawing and experience that whole thing. So looking at these trees, there you go, I'm darkening in that piece just because I saw some of the darker for a moment. I'm leaning on the side in some other parts and so on. Down along here there's a nice area of like undergrowth or something. So occasionally look, you see my hand tipping up to the point, making pointy marks, then dropping down to the flat. So flat, point, all sorts of interesting things go on there. And then there's a big tree going on off there. So let's lean really heavily on that flat side of the charcoal. Lots of pressure. Over here, not so much pressure. Then in the middle, there's all of these suggestions of the little trees in the background here. So suddenly now you notice I'm imprinting. I'm making a different type of mark. It's not up and down. It's using the side print of the charcoal, which does give a nice effect for leaves hanging out over. So you can see there, dang, 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 I'm moving. Sorry about that noise. And remember when we were kids at school, we would make noises as we drew. When we drew airplanes would make the noise to go along with it, but don't worry, I'll not be doing that right now. But you can see the different types of imprint creating something different. Now at the moment I'm still, if you notice, still using the black charcoal, but I'll introduce some white in a wee moment and see what happens. So I'm seeing these nice branches hanging over with leaves on them. So I've decided not to go for leaves like that, lots of little spotty leaves, because when I look at the image, I'm not seeing that. I'm seeing them almost as a group. And then occasionally there are branches, so I'm leaning heavily. See that point of the pencil there, or sorry, charcoal? So that's different to this. So I'm getting the information across where I see line, where I see dots, where I see soft areas, hard areas, dark and light. There's a very dark area begins to happen right up at the top of this tree here, so you can see I'm really rubbing around. I haven't rubbed with my fingers much yet, and because I kind of like what's happening here already. But I could, if I want, maybe use the finger to rub in the tree trunks, which are very solid. So you can see when I do that, suddenly they jump out. So they're no longer that sort of hazy. They're a wee bit more crisp. So you can do that, but don't over rub with drawings like this, because it becomes very addictive, and you can rub and rub until you actually lose the variety of marks. Everything just looks the same because it's all been rubbed, basically. I'll just bring that down slightly there, you know. In fact, what I'll do is I'm going to zoom out tiny little bit, if I can, yeah. And then put this tree trunk in. So again, nice black area there. And maybe scribble a wee bit, maybe get a little bit more energy into that. But there I am with my fingers not stopping and allowing myself to go with the flow, literally. I'm just going to raise this up a little bit. So I've raised the camera up a little bit so you can see a little more of what's going on here. But as I said, it's all about the constant movement here. I think I'll introduce light quite soon, but maybe put a few more remarks in there. I can see a few little marks breaking up in the background of whatever's going on here in this little glade or area of forest. And I hope you can sort of hear the noise that I'm making as well. Not me, but the charcoal is making as well. Sometimes it's a soft noise. Sometimes it taps. And then let's get a few harder lines in, or not harder areas. You see these? So I'm digging in a wee bit more to get some more marks that look a wee bit more like leaves. So with the hazy leaves in the background, a few that are closer and they're more defined. So with that, I'm tapping and leaning a little bit harder. So we can see the variety beginning to happen here. But constantly looking and thinking, this is not a photographic likeness, of course, but it's quite an exciting interpretation of the image that I'm looking at. What I'll do is maybe bring in some white. Now, got to be careful with this because we can overdo things with light white. But yes, it is about sunshine coming through. So let's squiggle around in between these dark bits there, just to see if we can create a wee bit more sense of the light in between these trees here. And it will mix to some extent, you can see there with the black, so you're going to get various greys and things, but that's okay. So if I in between there have shafts of light going on, and again I've decided, I quite like movement in the marks, even in the light areas, because that gives a sparkle, the sense of the sunlight coming through, So what I'm doing is not only making an image, but getting a feel for the mood of the image. And when you do that, then your paintings can have mood. The energy and the drawing comes through into your painting. Whereas if you have a boring, flat, geometric, slow drawing, then the chances are if you make paintings from it, it will be exactly that. I can go back now to the black over the top of the white and redo parts of the leaves if I want. And as you know, there comes a point where you have to be careful, because sometimes things work quite nicely and you don't need to overdo them, few thin lines, thick lines, dark, light, and so on. And maybe I'll not push that anymore. I'm just having so much fun doing this. But I think there's an energy about that drawing and possibilities in that. But it's all about the marks. Here you can see the drawing I've been working on, worked up a little bit more, and there's a sort of image I was trying to work from, using the charcoal and the chalk. But just a little thing that I did in a previous workshop, this thing that we can actually return a step back. So if you watch what I'm doing, I'm just simply rubbing. Now you can rub with a cloth if you don't want to rub with your fingers, but you see how I'm merging down the light and the dark. So everything is gently pulling together now. So suddenly the atmosphere changes, or the image changes to a large extent. So I have a softer image. I've softened it all down. It's become darker again, of course. But then if I want, I can leave some of the marks, and some I can begin to re-establish some of the light. So I can maybe say, let's work the light in between. But look at the way, again, I'm using the pastel, different directions, different pressures to create some sort of movement and energy in between these trees, these tree trunks here, and then here I can bring that up. So I can then create a different type of drawing. A drawing that maybe this time round is more melded together and less about harsh points. So that I guess what we're saying is the style of the drawing has changed, because I've chosen to partially destroy the previous drawing, but only leave some bits of it remaining. So you can see there, occasionally I'm tapping it with my fingers, my hand. And now it's maybe not as busy as the previous drawing, but it has a different atmosphere. It has a light, it has the mood, it has, I guess, a mistiness that maybe was different from the previous one. What I'd like to talk about here is the idea of what we call a thumbnail sketch, working on a very small scale. And it can encourage us to use marks. It can encourage us to be more expressive and less pernickety, if you like, and therefore focus on the marks. When we draw on a big page, an A2 page, we feel obliged, if it's bigger, therefore we should fill it with more detail. And so psychologically, if we come down smaller, our minds maybe think differently, so we take a more general view. So what I'm doing here with this little frame, I've drawn a tiny little frame. You can see here, if you the pencil, you can see the size of the pencil in relation to the frame which I want to draw into. And what I'm doing is I'm looking at an image here, and I'm just going to interpret that image on this tiny scale. Again, you can see my hand moving constantly as I find my way into what's going on here. So I'm looking around, my pencil's looking around, my eyes are looking around. So in doing that, I'm also able to think about the types of marks I'm making. So I know that these trees, they're overgrown with ivy and things. So some of the marks in the middle here are very dark. So you can see I'm leaning heavily, really scribbling that in there. I'll move over here for a bit, come up here. There's a nice big dark branch or tree coming up in behind that one. And again, this one of the things here is useful, is that if you're outdoors and time is of the essence and the weather is against you and so on, this is a way to work out problems very quickly. But you can see there I've been leaning. You see as that tapered up there, I leaned more lightly. I wanted that to taper away a little bit. Then I'm coming back, leaning more heavily here. But again, you see that my hand is virtually never stopping. There's a lovely shadow down the bottom there. I'll wash that across there. And then up the side here, there's this big tree really framing the thing almost like that. And it's a fairly dark tone. So let's occupy that. So that's a heavily pressured areas here and here. And in between there, then we have some lighter branches and things. So you can see how my hand's not leaning as heavily as I did perhaps here. And these little marks, there's lovely little clumps of leaves around these branches, lean a wee bit heavier, a wee bit lighter. Go by my instinct. There's a lovely dark area of leaves just about there, so you can see the point of my pencil squiggling, dotting maybe to create some suggestions of that. There's some over here. Overall, it's all about the light cracking through the trees. This little image here down there, I've just spotted a little tree stuck in right in there. So it's a solid, leaning heavily, smooth, solid, slow, fast, lighter up here. So my heart nearly guides me as much as my head and my eye. And around this tree here, for example, it's fuzzy around the edges because it has these ivy and things growing around it. So you see my hands, the pressure's off. I'm not leaning too heavily, but I'm making squiggly, dotty marks as opposed to the slow, solid marks that are in the main trunk of the tree. The shadow goes up there. There's something going on here. You hear me using terms like there's something going on. And then that's a good way to think of it, because if we give things names, oh, there's a tree here, oh, there's a leaf there, that can determine a lot of about how we look at things. If I just see there's a line there, there's a dot there, there's a squiggle there, and I talk in the language of drawing rather than the language of description, if that makes sense. Down there, I'm just looking, there's a lovely shadow cast off that tree, fire that in there. And, I've been working at this, I don't know, 10 minutes, maybe not even that. And I'm creating, I feel some feeling of what's going on in this picture here. I'll lighten that up a little bit because there's some very pale areas in there. So it's not all white, there's a few cracks of light. So you see how the little gray areas where I've taken the pressure off my pencil, down here as well, a little gray area. Lots of movement, constant movement. As my eye moves, my pencil's moving. A few wee sparks of darts there. There's a couple of branches cracking in there. You hear the different twists and twitches of my hand as I do this. And what we're hopefully getting is some composition there. So here is our little thumbnail drawing. So I've zoomed out of that now. And there's the image that I was working from. I just placed beside it on a printout, black and white. Just to give you some idea, I think I counted it was actually just over 5 minutes on that little sketch there. But I hope that it gives you some sense of how quickly you can capture some feeling of what's in front of you. Yes, I could look at the shapes in there, for instance, and say that tree's too tall, or that space is too wide. But then I can do another one and gather information. What's crucial here is the quality of these marks, that as I made them, I thought about them. Let's make a mark to represent that. Let's make a mark, not just for the sake of making marks, but for the sake of making the difference between a leaf and a trunk of a tree and a shadow and whatever. Okay, folks, so hopefully you found those pieces of information useful. I hope that what you remember is artists aren't photographers. Our job is not purely to reproduce a representational likeness, an exact likeness. As artists, what we're trying to do is put a little bit of, if you like, our heart and soul into things. And to interpret the world around is to make other people have feelings about that thing that we saw. So in order to do that, you have to have a good language, a language with which you can communicate. To have a language, you need to learn it. You need to learn the words. The only way to learn words is to speak them, to listen to them, to see what they sound like, to practice speaking them until you get it right. And that's what we're hopefully going to do on the workshop. Allow yourself to discover this medium, these words, the marks you can make with the bits of charcoal in your hand, and how they look like something, and file that away in your brain. And you will then be able to recall that when you come to draw and interpret other things. But the main thing for this workshop is to let go of your preconceived notions about making something look purely representational. That is important, and certainly is at another time. Today what we're going to try to do is find ways in which we can understand the words, the language of our art, if you like. I think it was Matisse, I'm not sure, Matisse said, creativity takes courage. And that is, as you probably know, one of the biggest things when we're painting, when we draw. It requires an awful lot of courage because we have fear. And we get that fear because we have expectations. We think this is the way a drawing should be because people are going to see it. And so therefore it has to be like all those drawings you've ever seen in books and videos. But that's not learning, that's just worry. That's just worrying about producing something that is satisfying somebody else. You're not learning. It's a bit like the language. If you think about that, if you're learning a language, the first while you learn it, you make no sense whatsoever, and it's very clumsy and maybe even laughable sometimes because you're trying to find your way in that language. But that's where we have to go to eventually grow into being fluent in that language. There's no real way around it. But for some reason, as artists, we want to jump straight to being fluent and being, good at what we do without actually having to do the course in language, which is not the case. So that's what this workshop's about. Hopefully we'll have good weather and have a lot of fun.